So what's going on with data transfer? Well, how can we do better? Every time I think about BitSwap, I think about BitTorrent. And now BitTorrent is a multi-party data transfer protocol that kicks butt, and BitSwap doesn't yet. And why? Why not? Because BitSwap operates in an information vacuum. It's very hard because it knows nothing. BitTorrent, if I'm about to download a movie, legally of course, I get a list of peers immediately that have the data. That's that content discovery part. It's built into BitTorrent because you have a torrent and it tells you who's got it, right? And then I need to know what the components of that movie file are. And again, the torrent, I get a list of all the blocks that go into that torrent. So I've got all this information with which to split up requests among many peers. In BitSwap, you have none of this. And as Dig pointed out, one of the reasons every implementation of BitSwap is so freaking complex is because it's trying to figure out the peers who have the data while it's trying to get the data. It's a lot. I would agree, we need to break up the content discovery from the data transfer. Oh, wait, I'm out of sync, aren't we? Hold on 1 second. Okay, BitSwap, no. Do I have GraphSync? GraphSync went away. Okay, that's cool. That's all. That's fine. Anyway, GraphSync is great, but it's end-to-end, and it loses the multi-peer thing. So that's a problem. But that's not actually the only problem with GraphSync. We've talked about this already, but just GraphSync has this everything but the kitchen sink approach to IPLD. So at this point, who feels like if I called on you right now, you could tell me what a SID is? Raise your hand. You won't get called on, don't worry. Okay, yes, see, a lot of hands. Okay, who in front of all of these other people could, if I called on you right now, could tell me what, other than Mauve, and maybe Rod, what codecs are, data model, schemas, ADLs, selectors? Wow, bold. All right, here, let's get the mic over to you. No, just kidding. Anyway, it's a lot less people, right? And it's just a big lift to get all this, right? They're complex. And the other thing about is, I introduced selectors. I actually wrote probably the earliest implementation of them somebody else designed them. But they're like this super complex arbitrary query language. And as Jeropa mentioned, they're maybe a little too complex. I almost feel like selectors were written because we didn't at the time understand the concept of like an IPVM or a virtual machine. So we almost built like a Turing complete like query language. And yeah, meanwhile, how many of all of you out there who actually work on these protocols, how many of you guys have tried to look up something by something other than either a path or a give me the whole DAG? Anyone, raise your hand if you've ever done something more complex. Oh, Volker, wait, Magic, yes, okay, all right, well, good for you all, but there's only 2 of you in a room of surprisingly a lot of people who are still here. So yeah, maybe you don't need all that, or maybe if you need all that, you should be using a VM, right? There are probably cases where you need that computation, but then switch to a VM. There's other problem with selectors, and I call it the Goldilocks problem, which is that like they are complicated, but they can never quite do what you just want, right? So for example, enumerate a Unix FS directory without actually reading any of the files or any of the things at the end. I think literally Magic might have encountered this problem like 2 weeks ago. And yeah, it's like they're not right there, right? And then, so there's all these like, maybe this suggests, given that we're like 3 years into development and like we still often reach for the selector we want and it's not, maybe we have a bit of a design issue that we ought to revisit and maybe start from scratch, start simple, right? Anyone know what GraphSync was written originally to do? Raise your hand. One person, what was it supposed to do? Sync graphs, no, something more specific. Yes. Synchronize the Filecoin blockchain. Yes. Cool. Does anyone know if GraphSync syncs the Filecoin blockchain right now? It does not. In fact, it can't quite do that because of some selector design issues. So, yeah, something went wrong there. And what ended up happening is in Filecoin, the folks developing Filecoin decided to write this little protocol that was just tailored to the blockchain. Again, understand your data, write a protocol for it. And all that, they wrote something called BlockSync. And all BlockSync does is when you're syncing the Filecoin blockchain, you query other peers and you say, give me like, what are going to be the SIDs of the next 100 blocks that I'm going to need to sync, right? And then as soon as it has those SIDs, it just uses Bitswap to get them, right? And so that gets around the problem, the round trip problem with the blockchain, because again, the blockchain is a very deep DAG, but at the same time, it uses Bitswap, which gives you the multi-peer. And so I've been thinking about, I think there's something there. I think there's a pattern in this, because we know this actually works for syncing over libp2p super fast a difficult DAG like a blockchain, right? And it's working in production. And so and they're not the only ones who wrote a protocol this way. There was a company called Query. They do not exist anymore because they went and made IRO. And they made IRO because they needed IPFS to do things it didn't. But in the course of building their product, they built a protocol, I think it was called Manifetch or something. It basically sent the information about the DAG you were going to download before you downloaded it. So what it's actually doing there, if you think, like Dig was saying, split the content discovery and the data transfer, and I would go one further, and I would say split the content discovery and then split the DAG discovery, right? Find more information about your data that you're going to download before you try to download it. And then multi-peer becomes completely possible, right? And it becomes fast. Now, there's some funkiness you got to throw in there to maintain the incremental verifiability. I'll hand wave over that, but I think it can be done. And yeah, I think this gets you to the sort of BitTorrent situation, right? And I think we could do it. And in fact, if I were to look back, because I wrote GraphSync, I wrote the initial implementation, and if I could go back and do it again, I would have written GraphSync this way. I would have had it just send you SIDs, tell you about your DAG, not try to send blocks. Yeah, I have my own little keyword for it. I call it lightning storm. Doesn't matter. We all have keywords in Magic projects. But yeah, what I think we ought to have is essentially a core loop that takes a list of blocks and divides up those requests into multiple peers over a protocol like Bitswap, though it could be something simpler, and then has some software to verify what you're getting back and to make sure you're not downloading too much without verifying that. Yeah, this pattern even has a name. We call it the manifest pattern. I think it's something to look into. There's so many optimizations you could unlock with this. Like one of the things I think is maybe we should just write a UnixFS sync. Right? UnixFS queries, we know almost everything we need to know about, right? The gateways language essentially works very well for UnixFS. If you need to traverse a path, you actually don't need multi-party for traversing a path. GraphSync is great up until the point where you get the large file at the bottom. In fact, GraphSync would be great if you could traverse the whole DAG of a UnixFS file except for the bottom layer. Because it's only the bottom layer of a UnixFS file that has the bytes, right? So you could traverse that whole thing in a single request. If you're using GraphSync, you could even send back all the little blocks, and then you get a list of blocks at the bottom. You don't even need any additional verifiability because you already have the whole DAG, and now you split up those big block requests over Bitswap, right? There's other ideas. Once you stop sending blocks, you can start thinking about storing just links between blocks, right? Rather than, and it's highly cacheable. If I run a DAG traversal via a selector, and I generate a bunch of SIDs that go into those blocks, I can record them. And the next time you request that selector, I've got that list of SIDs ready to go, right? There's other ways you could store that data. There's a lot of room to explore there. There's some, I think we mentioned there's a protocol called CarSync. The Bloom filter is a cool path to go down to try to avoid sending duplicate data to just send me what I don't have. Some other folks are using something called erasure coding, and now I'm just like throwing out things that we aren't really digging into, but are things you could explore if you wish to write the best Web3 transfer protocol ever. The erasure coding is really good for kind of ensuring that we have a method for dealing with peers that are slow or that essentially go on and offline. It's similar to some of the ideas behind Rapide. And finally, I'll just leave you with this, right? We have the technology. We can do this, folks. We can make it much faster. And if you've come to this talk today, this track today, and you're inspired, there's so much room to do here and so many ways to help. And I hope to see all of you on the GitHubs, on the Slacks, on the Discords, and all that. Thanks. Yeah.